Yeah. All right, guys.
All
We
right.
should be good to go.
What's going on, Reef Builders? Sean and Evie here, and we have brought in special guest today, Andrew Rhyne, alongside our very own Rob Mouget. And we have joined Andrew Rhyne to talk to him about his contributions to the aquarium industry. We had a nice article come out last week that Andrew authored and just was kind of the topic of conversation for the last week. So I thought that I would bring him on to the live stream just so I could introduce Andrew and tell you a little bit about his contributions within the aquarium industry. He is a literal titan of the marine world, a professor of marine biology at Roger Williams University, and a research scientist at the New England Aquarium. He has pioneered the captive breeding of species once thought impossible, like the queen triggerfish, and is a leading expert on data behind the aquarium trade. Please welcome 2017 Masna Award winner Andrew Rhyne to the Reef Builders live stream. How's it going, Andrew?
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on, and I'm happy to be here and chat about this last article I wrote for you, and then some of the other work we work on.
Well, I appreciate it, and I know that sometimes these are sensitive topics, and I know just from talking with Rob, who's told me a fair amount about you, has a long friendship going on with you, and that you really are about just sustainability and kind of keeping the hobby strong and very ethical. And so I know that article comes from a good place for you. And Evie and I agreed as well. And I just want to talk to you more about kind of what we discussed in your intro is just, your contributions in this hobby, how long that you've been a part of it, where your passions come from. I know that you have a wet lab at Roger Williams University, and you have a new show, Reef Retreat, that we'll talk about towards the end here that looked really exciting last year. And so why don't we start with kind of what brought you into this crazy aquarium world?
Yeah, so I from a really young age, I've like a lot of people, always been interested in the marine world and aquariums. And I started volunteering at the North Carolina Aquariums at Fort Fisher when I was a teenager. And so if it was too rough to go fishing offshore, that's usually where I was. And then did my undergraduate in marine biology and continued to work at the aquarium and intern, and then ended up going to graduate school to do this exact thing I'm doing now. And was in Florida for about 8 years for that, and then a postdoc. And then this job came open at Roger Williams University. And I moved us to New England, and I had never been up here before until I flew up for the interview and flew into Boston and started a career basically doing what I had went to graduate school to do, was to work on marine aquarium species aquaculture basically, and then look at fisheries and trade and kind of the intersection of those areas. And I really came into this from an aquaculture production standpoint of really being interested in producing animals, and then got really interested in the broader aspects of the trade when I attended the first Marine Ornamentals Conference that was sponsored by NOAA Sea Grant and some other groups. That was 1999, and met really some people that had been working in Indonesia and the Philippines their entire lives, working on sustainability and fisheries problems, and got to kind of see that part of what the aquarium trade looks like, and became really interested in some of those problems and challenges, and then realized there wasn't any data to support any of these types of this work. And so we really kind of focused in well, I'm still working on it today, but since about 2008 or so, 2009, on looking at what actually comes into countries for the entire wildlife trade now, but primarily from the aquarium trade.
Very nice, and you went over that very quickly, but that sounded like a whole lot of work and contributions. And so,
Yeah.
What brought you into some of your most notable accomplishments with the basic captive raising fish? First breeding to the queen triggerfish. When did you start working towards that project where you started to breed?
Yeah, so the fish, like the triggerfish, it's kind of funny because I was interviewing for this job, and so this is a really unique position that I have. So I have when I was hired, I was hired as a joint position between the New England Aquarium and Roger Williams University, literally as like each institution contributed half of me, right? And they kind of split me, and I was basically centered here at Roger Williams, but then I would be up in Boston a lot. And so when I landed in Boston to interview for the job, I was walking around the giant ocean tank, and I don't know how many people have been to the New England Aquarium, but this is this iconic 1960s built aquarium that really is the first major high-rise aquarium in the world. And um, I saw this fish and I was like, oh, I've always, I went to graduate school to work on triggerfish. Actually, I thought that's what I was going to do for my graduate work. And I was like, well, if I'm going to work on triggerfish, I might as well work on clown triggerfish, might as well pick off the hardest one to work on. And turned out I couldn't get any broodstock, and I tried to get pairs, right? And I tried pretty hard. And my advisor at the time, Dr. Jendalin, he sat me down about 6 months into my master's work and said, okay, I kind of let you try to get broodstock. You tried really hard, but this is not going to work. So why don't you work on these shrimp, right? And so that's how the peppermint shrimp became my life for about 6 years, right? And so if people have peppermint shrimp, I'm the one who's renamed all of those basically, and so. Um, but while I'm interviewing for this job, they've got that queen triggerfish swimming around in the tank, in the giant ocean tank, and I was talking to them about it. And they said, oh, yeah, it's been spawning here for about 25 years. Not this particular fish, but we've had fish that come in, they spawn all the time. And I was like, really? And I was like, okay, now I know the first fish I'm going to work on when I get here. And so, that was so, I got the job up here, and I started setting the lab up here at Roger Williams, and they spawned, and then we got some eggs. Now, when queen triggerfish spawn, the male guards the nest, and the female will go in between different males. And the male guards the nest. He's 18 inches and he has big teeth, and he's right. It's 1.5 million eggs in that nest. And so the divers had to go get the eggs for me. A lot of respect for that. They're good at it, but because pretty territorial fish, and if a triggerfish has eggs, if it comes and bites you when you're swimming by it in the ocean, if it actually comes out and bites you or attacks you, it's probably sitting on a nest. And so they used to have to deal with those nests occasionally because they're pretty territorial, and they would beat up other fish and stuff. So they grabbed a little tiny scoop of eggs for me, took them back down here at Roger Williams, and they are tiny. They are so small, and that little tiny scoop, it was like 50,000 fish larvae hatched, right? And then the race was on to try to be able to feed them. I had worked on my postdoc, and a lot of my stuff, my side projects in graduate school were on copepods. And so we kind of had some of the mechanics to do that, but this was in the 2009 realm when we just, so we just spent a lot of time on the boat with a plankton net and sieving plankton, trying to get enough small food for these guys to eat. And so we got, I think we ended up, forget how many we had settle into the juvenile phase. They're kind of a pain because they go through this 20-some day larval phase, and then they go into this pelagic juvenile phase. So a lot of these types of fish will float in the sargassum until they find a reef that can be home, and then they'll settle down, but they don't like each other. And so we got to figure that out. And we ended up with, a couple fish that looked like the painting here that one of my former students painted for me as for that, and to memorialize that event. And it's a really awesome genus to work with. Our family really ballistic, and then the whole family really is amazing development and patterns that happen. But and it would be neat to see more triggerfish, I think, readily available. They tend to be very seasonal because you get these big drops of triggerfish that come in. It depends on the spawning season, but after the spawning season, you'll get juveniles that come in, and then after that, you'll see the size just kind of continues up. And but yeah, so it was just every day, all day, 5 a.m. to like 10 p.m. to kind of get those guys through early on. And so
I want you to know, I'm still amazed to the divers who are collecting the eggs. As someone who's been chased by Titan triggers in the wild, yeah, they bite. And so, big queens, they're very brave. You were lucky you got some brave.
Well, yeah, so Chris is really good at it. He's really, really good at it. And I've got this great video of them actually collecting those eggs too, that I show occasionally, where really gentle with the fish, but very careful not to, they've got to pin the fish down essentially with a soft fin, and then get the eggs really quick before the fish can get out and attack you for taking the eggs. And it actually can be kind of tough in these tanks. And people probably, hobbies probably notice this, like chromis will do this. Some other fish will do this. Damsels are really bad about it. Damsels actually hurt when you're around their eggs. They'll like pick at your ears and things when you're diving. But they can be really aggressive and become pretty territorial in your tank and attack other fish when they're spawning and things. People probably have noticed that, and that's kind of the same situation, except for these things have really big teeth and can be pretty intimidating.
Yep. So I was going to say, one of the other things that you did that I was fascinated by, and it was a great presentation at MACNA, was a discussion of trying to validate the cyanide tests that were being discussed and the metabolites
Sure.
that came after those. And I was curious if any, a brief discussion, but any further progress. Is that really going to be something someday we could potentially
Yeah. That's one of these kind of little avenues that you take. You're working in an area and you come across something that happened to be a friend of mine that published that paper. And we thought, oh, we'll replicate that work and kind of build on that work and make that work stronger. And it turns out that data was all fake, and so makes it impossible to replicate. And we spent years trying to do that. Before we had tried to do that, a molecular geneticist colleague of mine in the department, we had been working on a molecular test, so genes that turn on and off from that fishing event. So cyanide has been a historic problem in certain parts of the world for live food fish and also for the aquarium fish trade, and it was a real issue in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's been there's been a lot of hard work there, but we don't know how many fish are caught with cyanide today because we don't have a way to actually look at the fish to see. And so we have been working on some molecular methods and protein methods, in the 2008 to 2012 range, and we stopped all of that while we were trying to replicate this work because we thought it was a far superior way of doing it, much simpler, looked really good, the data looked really great. And so we spent 4 years trying to replicate that work. A colleague of mine who just retired here, an analytical chemist, really amazing analytical chemist, Nancy Breen, and I have worked on that with several students. And when you're working on something that you can't actually do and you tell students that it looks like it's going to be really easy to do, you can really cause some challenges for their faith in science. So but science is based on data, which is kind of nice too. So we were able to reconstruct some of the math around this work, and Nancy was able to once we did the math, because we were really frustrated we couldn't get it to work, realized that data wasn't real. And so we went back to the molecular methods. And so we've been working on some molecular methods. It's not a simple on-off, like they've been exposed, they've not been exposed. Pretty complicated, and we don't have a large body of funding for it. So we kind of start and stop. And the data is a little bit like, we get some data, it looks really promising. We try to confirm it with some other data. It's not as promising. And you continue to work. So we're still working on it. I consider it to be probably the one. If you asked me when I took this job, I wanted to work in raising new fish for the aquarium, for the public aquarium side of things and also the hobby side of things, and develop new methods. But I also wanted to, this was been right there, like number 2 is to try to solve this problem. And so Nancy and I published a lot of papers on this topic, and there's a National Geographic article, Coral Magazine's covered kind of the sleuthing of trying to figure out that this data wasn't real. We're still kind of on top of that. And we published some data, I think it came out last year, on how long cyanide actually stays in the system of a fish. So how long can you theoretically test for it? But until we can get some of these new next generation molecular methods really worked out, and that's not just somebody saying they can do it, because I've watched presentations of a couple companies out there that when Ricardo's paper came out, I forget who it was, one of the ICP companies got up and gave a presentation how they're developing this test, they're going to use this method, and they kind of made a website and things like that. That's what we're trying to do is actually really validate this work. And so we're trying to figure out like what genes and proteins are expressed or made to deal with the detoxification process that fish have to go through, and what markers would last, say, a couple weeks, so that ideally you would build a test that you can validate whether they've been exposed or not in the country they're from at the source, so you can help exporters kind of clean their supply chain up.
Yep.
And unfortunately, although this has been talked about for a long time, there's just not an avalanche of interest in the funding community. And we've submitted some grant proposals and we've gotten some funding. We did some work with Mystic Aquarium that got a little bit of money to do some in the initial molecular work. I've spent a ton of my own money. I won an international prize in 2016, and I spent a lot of that money working on this topic. But that molecular work, is, if anybody does that type of work, it's very expensive, and so it's just, we work on it when we can, but we don't have a dedicated person, really, like a graduate, a postdoc or somebody, to kind of crush through it. But we're still dedicated to try to fix it. It's one of the most frustrating science stories of my life. I think science is a process of failures, really, right? Trying to do things, whether it's raising, anybody who's raised an animal, a fish or anything knows this. You're learning through your failures, right?
Right.
Try something that doesn't work, make a lot of observations, make an adjustment. Oh, that works a little better. Come back. That's just the process that we're used to. You get really used to that. But that whole process, I think, is such an interesting story of why science is such a powerful tool, but also kind of the pitfalls and the dangers of the incentivation, the kind of incentivizing publications over actual legitimate data, or some of the marketing that goes into data and things like that kind of, I've always been kind of allergic to. So
Yeah, understood. Sean, you and I were talking a little bit about, you were mentioning some of the different foods that we could look at to help enrich for those of us that were keeping animals, right? And you had a couple of questions, I think, for Andy about what he may have worked on in that realm.
Well, I know that I had the pleasure of Evie and I did have the pleasure of being able to work closely to Mark with Vitalis. And we visited his facility, saw how he produced the food, and even we helped bring that over into the U.S. We've also worked with another brand, Extreme, that has a cichlid farm, and they really dialed in how important the actual food is to get the fish to breed. And since you have a large amount of experience breeding fish as well, and one of the first things you said when you got the eggs for the queen triggerfish is, like, I've got all of these eggs, now the race to feed. And so can you tell me more about that and the importance of dialing in the diet to have a successful breeding?
Yeah, so there's really two large components to that. One is the broodstock diet, right? So if you don't have really great eggs, you can try as hard as you might, but the larvae are always going to die. And so there are some real essential amino acids and fatty acids that really go into broodstock diets. There's been a tremendous amount of work done in the food fish world on this topic. There's not been a lot of work focused on the smaller tropical fish, which have a very different metabolism and life history. And so they may have different requirements. And so every type of fish you're working on is going to have a slight different variation to that. But the neat thing is some of the work we've done recently with clownfish. We've got a grant with some colleagues at the University of Florida to work on looking at some of clownfish are such an important aquaculture organism, but for a product, right? We're looking at a whole suite of things. But one of the things we looked at is broodstock diets, and so we did a really neat fatty acid study. So fatty acids are the omega-3s that you might see in a pill form that you take, for your skin or your health or whatever. Those omega-3 fatty acids are what's so important for fish eggs as well. And so we were able to look at the transition from diet into egg through a really nicely designed study and a student project here. And what the good news is that we don't always know what diets do the best for fish, and they're all a little bit different. But if you notice that your spawn quality's gone down, you suspect it might be your diet. It only takes a couple spawns to fully incorporate all of that nutritional difference between the diet you're feeding them now and their eggs. It takes a couple weeks, and they'll transition that fully into the eggs. It does not take a whole year once they're spawning. It's pretty quick, and we have some really neat markers that we were able to look at for this transition. And so that's the broodstock diet's absolutely fundamental. And then on the larval side, this is the most challenging thing, I think, for people that don't have a dedicated lab that does this work, right? Is We've done a lot of work on copepods. I've been working on copepods in the early 2000s. I used to get people, and back then would tell me in meetings, I would give a presentation, well, you just can't produce enough of them to be commercially viable, or you can't, this will never work, right? But that's the natural food of fish larvae, right? That's what fish larvae eat. So something like tangs or triggerfish or the anthias, these really fish with very small mouths when they first hatch, right? Angelfish and things. They need a particular size of one of these really tiny copepods that we work on. And it has to be that first nopular stage generally for them to be successful. That stage only lasts in the larval tank like 10 hours or something, maybe if you're lucky, maybe 6 hours or so. And so having a small enough food early enough is really critical, but that food also has to be nutritious enough. So because you're raising it on live microalgae, you have to have really great microalgae or your copepods aren't great. So this is a whole cascade that's happening. And so your challenges could be the egg quality is not great. It could be that the copepod size is not right, or it could be the nutrition of the copepods isn't right, or it could be something else, right? And so that's the world we're in now when we're working with fish that are much more challenging to rear than, say, dottybacks and clownfish. And yeah, we'll spool a tank of dottybacks up occasionally, and if you raise dottybacks the way we raise everything else, you end up with an entire tank full of dottybacks you have no idea what to do with, right? And so it is, I think understanding how larvae behave is really important. And then understanding that if you're going to endeavor into these kind of more challenging fish that require some of these other foods, you really need to focus on really high quality broodstock eggs, really good spawn size and fertility rates. So high numbers of eggs and fertility and high fertility rates. And then you have to really spend some time on those live feeds and make sure that you've got all your parts and pieces. And I am so impressed when I see hobbyists do this out of their house. Like, I would not for me. I have employees and students and space but I'm always really impressed to see people do that whole architecture out of their house by themselves. Basically, it's just so impressive. And then to watch hobbyists interact with each other. I published some papers in the 2010 era talking about like the interchange of information between aquarium hobbyists. This is back when people actually used to talk to each other more, I think more so than they do now on forums. Now it's just chatter in places, and forums have their own life of their own. But the exchange, the genuine exchange of information between hobbyists, and it's not just the aquarium hobby, it could be any hobby, but of how to do something is probably, to me, one of the most genuine exchanges I have seen of information that you will see is this passion for something and sharing that with other people and generally want people to be successful. Very encouraging way of sharing information. And it's how you build on success. It's how you look back and go, gosh, we thought this stuff was impossible 20 years ago, and it turns out it's not. And if you have a gap from 2000 to 2026, it may look like instant success, but it really is 15 to 20 years of people grinding away at trying to solve these problems that make that happen.
Yeah, it always amazed me looking at the work like Eric Sten did and some other folks.
Yeah.
Right. When it came to figuring out what was required in raising and just viewing at your lab, those big, huge containers full of macroalgae and pods.
Right. And Eric's a great example of that. I met Eric when he was at a shrimp farm managing their algae production down in the Keys, and he was looking to move back up into mid-Florida where my graduate lab was. And I literally broke Junda's arm to get him in my lab, right? I basically said, let's just this guy needs a place to start his business he wants to start. Let's just get him space. We need to learn how to, we need algae for copepods. And Eric's a great example of high precision algae yields high success in copepods and live feeds, and that again, those successes build on themselves, right? And you cannot have one without the other. And so I took that kind of ethos of algae should be done really well into our lab, and then kind of looked at it how we can do it with my undergraduate population. And and so we're building out our greenhouse now, Rob. So when you come this summer for Reef Retreat, you'll see our new algae greenhouse with our new tanks from like the tanks I've had that you were talking about. I get these tanks from Japan. that they're kind of hard to get in, but we got a container of them this time. And so there are these polycarbonate tanks that we can pasteurize and heat up and do algae really, really well. And so.
Cool. Very cool.
Well, you mentioned your lab a few times, and I think it would be helpful for everyone watching to understand more about it and what it would, who gets into these programs at the lab. How, if you're interested in the marine biology and getting into this industry, what is this program like, and how do you sign up?
Yeah, so we're an undergraduate institution primarily, right? So we have an undergraduate population, a fairly large department. I think our program's almost 50 years old now, like the marine biology program here at Roger Williams. So it's a really old marine biology program. We're a small private school, so we're not a school for everyone when it comes to like going to college. And I think people need to kind of look at college from a very kind of deep personal lens about what size school they want to go to, how their particular funding mechanisms works for school, and then find a program that fits them. Some people want to be at large schools, some people want to be at small schools, but we are a small program. So my classes are usually about 12 students or so, 12 to 15 students, sometimes 18 in my lab classes and maybe 30 or so. But we really have a high impact program in the aquarium science aquaculture areas, and that spans from shellfish aquaculture all the way to the fish aquarium side of things, and kind of in between in the biotechnology, microbiology side of things. So and it's a phenomenal lab. I was so impressed that the minute I stepped into this lab when I interviewed for the job, I had never seen a lab built. The floors are sloped correctly into the proper place. Water goes where it's supposed to. And then we have just built it out since then. And so, right now, and I get a lot of interest from people who have graduated from someplace and want some additional training or things like that. They want to come work or something. So we've got an online relationship too with the eQuaris. So the Aquarium Vet has an eQuaris course, so we offer that now with them for college credit, and we're working on a graduate certificate and some other programming that would serve kind of workforce development, workforce training. So I look at education kind of as a multifaceted thing. Part of it is true workforce training, that is skill development, that sort of stuff. Other parts is that classic educational side of things, critical thinking, learning how to, get through problems and solve tasks. And you could get a degree in biology and go work in business or wherever you might work and be successful, right? And so, you kind of it's to me it's an all of the above thing, and our program kind of reflects that. But we really specialize in putting people's hands on things when it comes to this, right? And so we have students that go on to really great graduate schools and do the type of work they want to do, and then we have students that go right into industry. A lot of my students are out in the public aquarium world or in the commercial aquaculture space or water quality companies. They're all over the country and all over different places, but it's just we have a really dedicated group of faculty and staff that kind of make that happen.
Yeah, I think that's really quite exceptional. Having seen your facility and been marveling at the water management and the enthusiasm of all the students, right? I mean, there were so many cool things that were there. And the other thing that I know we wanted to talk a little bit about was, the view of coming from that aquaculture environment, right? And looking at, you wrote an excellent editorial for us that kind of looked at the juxtaposition of aquaculture, wild collection, the fact that the two can coexist. And I wonder where you came from that aspect of a little, what your thought process was around that.
I came from it, I think, as someone who kind of came through the world in, from fishing and salt marshes and into the public aquarium world at North Carolina, where we would go out and collect all the local fish for that exhibits, and then getting into aquaculture, then getting into the aquarium hobby in a more ingrained way, working in a retail environment, seeing that side of things, going to graduate school for it, and kind of just looking at the complexities of this, and then meeting fishermen in the countries that your fish come from, and actually getting to know that community of people. And so I sit on several committees that really are looking at how this coexisting works, right? AZA has a committee that I'm a founder member of that literally is charged to do this exact thing. And I have really strong feelings about the need for both, right? Because there are distinct advantages in both both segments of aquaculture and also a sustainable wild fishery, and they are not exclusionary of each other, and they often are mutually complementary to each other. But I also have been so fascinated by the user conflicts that are in this space, and I have been so frustrated at the activists that have been involved with the situation in Hawaii. And every scientist who is engaged with that data or studied that is as frustrated as I am. I have spent, the last 20 years working on data and the way the trade looks and what's traded. And, I was in Australia, a CITES technical workshop for the marine aquarium fish, and just 5 days of dealing with activism and the lack of data, right? And so for me, like I'm really, really critical and I just don't have the room for the activist, and I also don't have the room for special interest to get into these conversations and not say something, right? And I always have done that. And I mean, if you look at For the Fishes, for example, like or Franz Fred Weber, and this, those activists, they, and they and different organizations have different ethos behind them, different funding mechanisms, different goals. But when you present, some of these preservation organizations, or these animal rights organizations with really what I consider to be irrefutable data that a fishery is sustainable. It's not that it's perfect. It's just that it's not unsustainable, right? It's a sustainable fishery, right? But they don't recognize that. Then to me, I just kind of know where they're at, and it doesn't matter what they say or write. You kind of know that their end goal is not sustainability. It is the elimination of use, and and some of it's user conflicts. So there's a large dive community in some of these areas, and you have to deconflict fishing and diving because they do not go together necessarily. Correct. And but you can harm the environment far more from tourism and diving than you would from fishing, right? Right. But you can also harm the environment from fishing, and you can have really good ecotourism. You can do these things in ways, but you can't always say that tourism or diving is better than fishing, because that's just not true. It's just not analytically true. And I grew up diving, and I love to go places and dive, but it's just, if you put thousands of divers onto a reef all the time, and the hotel support and everything like that, you can damage areas. So you have to thoughtfully go about how you're going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And fishing is no different. You have to think about that as well. And so what really, I think the thing that has always struck me is from the hobbyist perspective, they have not spent 20 years thinking about this, and which is totally understandable that people do not want to necessarily spend that kind of time thinking about these things. But so it's really easy for someone to poison people's minds essentially with the idea that one is better than the other for a particular reason. And I see this happening in the funding world all the time. So there was a nonprofit group out there that was kind of stood up to help promote aquaculture. And the person running that group used to tell me that my message was too complicated, and it was much easier to tell people that we needed to raise fish to save the environment, which is not always true, by the way. But right. Hobbyists will instantly think because they're raising corals in their basement or their shop that they're somehow conserving coral reefs. Well, no, you're just raising corals. And so sometimes those things can be beneficial, but that requires evidence to demonstrate that. And then the other thing that I've noticed is that when I've given testimony for ESA, so Endangered Species Act listings, right? The Bang-eyed cardinal is a good example, or some of the coral listings. There'll be people in the United States with the coral listings that raise corals, make money from raising corals, that will support a ban on the import of corals. And I know hundreds of coral farmers in Indonesia that lost their jobs. And this is not you can just go get another job type of event, because of a conflict between two government agencies, and really great coral mariculture operations were shuttered for 18 months or so. So, these types of things have real world impacts to fishermen and to farmers all over the world. And so when we make decisions, or we make statements, I think we should have data to back that up. And it's not that people shouldn't maybe voice what their preference is. And you could understand that a company that does aquaculture would be like, well, we want to capture the market and sell these fish. But I find it so troubling when you see a public comment in a in an area there is no gray area with the West Coast Hawaii fishery. That fishery is a sustainable fishery. It's well managed. Did it have some issues in the 90s? Sure.
Sure.
Did they fix that? They definitely did. Right. There was a whole council of people who get together and work on that fishery. Did they continually need to improve that? Absolutely. And have they? Yes. And then activism closed that fishery down. The NGOs have raised a ton of money. There's a lot of money in Hawaii to be raised on this issue. So they have a lot of money supporting the closure of that fishery through the courts. The fishermen went back and did an environmental impact assessment, which is a enormous task to do, very expensive, right? Environmental impact assessment comes back and says, this is a very sustainable fishery plan. They've truncated the fishery down, reduced the number of fish, reduced the number of species, done a lot of different things. The courts had to come back and say, yeah, this plan works. We're going to allow it to open. And so you're just continuing to see activism try to close this down. And they're committed to it. And they have worked on their messaging for the last 15 to 20 years to try to get their messaging right. They've poured a ton of money into elected officials and all kinds of other things to try to get this done. But they don't have science behind them. Right. And that's my stance. It's not that it's not that politically somebody can't go do something and feel good that they did something, but they're not saving the yellow tang population in Kona by shutting that fishery down. That fishery is not impactful to the overall population of fish in that area. And that is a scientific fact. There's no data to support any notion otherwise. And that was before the new fishery rules that they were going to put in, which is a much smaller fishery. So, so that fishery is a very sustainable fishery, very well monitored, supplies really high quality fish, had fishermen that could make a living, right? Not poverty wages, but an actual living doing that. And people did make livings doing that. They made a living fishing, being on the water, being able to fish. People made living packing those fish, transporting those fish, selling those fish. Those people are out of jobs because of that. And so to me, I see the user conflict for what it is. It's just a conflict of interest, and that position that Biota took is really just, to me, is that, I mean, I worked on that title. I thought about that title for a couple of days to try to come up with a way so somebody could glance at a blog article and I could get my point across. And it really is market manipulation. They need that fish to be very expensive to recover some of the investment that they've made. It's a really large investment that someone has put money into. There's investors behind that. And so they're trying to recoup their money off that. And it's abhorrent to me that you would use a fishery that is as sustainable as that fishery has been shown and do that to people who've worked really hard to try to have a well-managed, sustainable fishery and to advocate for its closure. But I have watched this happen at scientific meetings on that fishery, and I stand up in the audience and ask them to back their statement up in their data. And that's just kind of what I'm doing here. It's the same thing. It's just, I happen to watch these hearings. I'm one of those, I do watch all these hearings, and I sometimes will write letters and support things, but I tend to read testimony and watch hearings and stuff because it's a big part of my research field. And when I came across that, I was, it's the most direct example of this problem that I have seen. I have seen kind of other people kind of dance around the issue, like, oh, right. But this was directly like a plea to shut the fishery down, yes, for the sole standpoint of supporting their investment. And so now you can message all around that all you want and say, well, we're learning a lot from this fish, or we put a lot of, climate change in the future may impact that fishery, and we need to be able to work on these things. Sure, that can definitely be true, but that was not the point of their testimony. And then what really I think should hit home for people is that information is not in a vacuum. So Earth Justice and some of these advocacy organizations who are really well capitalized, really good at their jobs, really, really good at their jobs, right? Their job is to push policy, and they've decided this is a policy they're going to push. They are taking that information, they're taking that public comment, and they're handing that public comment to policymakers, and they're saying, here, it's easier for you to shut this down now because this is being produced in Hawaii as well. And so other people have jobs, and we're going to eliminate these fishermen jobs, but they don't matter because we have this, right? And so that's what's happening with that letter. It's not that a company made a position, it's that a company made a position, which I would consider to be, to me, it's a kind of a corrupt way of saying things, not in a legal way, but like, to me, it's just the ethical framework to make that position is really troubling. But the impact of that is that now what you have is maybe you'll have a policymaker or somebody on the fence about, do we shut a sustainable fishery down because there's fishermen making a livelihood? And then it's like, well, let's have this aquaculture company take over all their jobs, basically. Right. And that is unfortunate in so many ways. And I know a lot of fishermen, have known fishermen my entire life. I also have heard a lot of conspiracy theories about aquaculture, but that's why there's conspiracy theories about us in aquaculture trying to take over their jobs, right? Is because things like this happen. And so, but aquaculture is not novel, these user conflicts, right? You see these in renewable energy. There's a tremendous amount of money to try to reduce the amount of renewable energy that we have available because there's a huge conflict there. A lot of money behind not looking at wind farms, right? Just down the road from my house, there's a lady who owns a house on the ocean that looks directly out to Revolution Wind. She's very annoyed by the little red blinking lights 15 miles offshore, right? Because she's got a $10 million house looking at them. And she spent a ton of money stirring people up in activism, right? So these are common problems that we have in society, but this is my area that I've worked on for a long time, and I usually speak up on these things. And I was, I wrote it and I sent it to a couple people to read, and then I was like, okay, so who's going to read it? Right, where can I put it? And I emailed it to Rob and another hobby. You're not really a blog anymore. I don't think we use that. What do you call like what Reef Builders is now?
You can call it a blog, you can call it a website, a forum, right? Yeah. There's a number of things, but
it's our new way of ingesting media. It's our new way of ingesting a lot of media, right? Like, so there's not, but so I sent it to a couple of people, and Rob was like, oh, this is really important. I'll publish it tomorrow morning for you. And then, that's kind of where it's at. And this is a topic that I really like to talk about. So, because I think it's really important. I've talked about it for a very long time. I think it's really important that hobbyists understand that their aquaculture fish is not saving coral reefs.
Exactly.
It's not. Saving coral reefs involved reducing the impact that threatens coral reefs. And climate, warm water is going to bleach and kill most of the corals in the ocean, right? That is happening now, and it's going to get much worse. Overpopulation of areas that have sensitive environments, so too much development, too much runoff, agricultural development, mining. If you look at the U.S. government has produced some phenomenal reports of the threats of corals to coral reefs, or threats on corals and coral reefs, and the aquarium trade does show up sometimes as a threat, and it can be a threat, but it is so far down on the list. The thing is that we don't have we're not the oil company or the mining company, so it's easier for activism to say like, okay, let's just do something. And so we're going to eliminate this because we don't like it. And then you marry that with animal rights activists who don't think that people should be keeping animals in captivity. You marry those things up, and you kind of have a coalition of people who are willing to drive to an outcome. And so, if the fishery opens in Hawaii, it's not going to have a meaningful impact on the yellow tang population. If the fishery stays closed in Hawaii, it's not going to have a meaningful impact on the yellow tang population. The yellow tang population is the yellow tang population. It doesn't matter if that fishery opens or closes. There's going to be no impact to that population. Now, people are going to market it one way or the other, right? But the reality is it's not going to have a population. So if I buy a whole bunch of yellow tangs that are captive, that are aquaculture, right? Not going to have an impact on the yellow tang population. What has an impact on populations is really good management, good governance, and dealing with these externalities of the fact that water is getting so warm that you cannot support corals in parts of the world that used to support corals.
Yeah, absolutely true. And all of those interactions that occur between different user groups is so much of a political issue. And we see that, just like you said, between fishermen, between divers, boaters, right? All of those activities that impact that area. And unfortunately, on the aquarium side, we're low hanging fruit for a lot of those attempts to go after us, because there isn't a central organization that's in place, right? That's providing counter narrative and other
Yeah, I mean,
you do.
right. It's a niche hobby, right? It's a small hobby, right? And it doesn't have a centralized body. And then a lot of the people inside the industry don't have the same ethos to get behind things and work together and things like that. There's a whole long history of that, right? I've watched that for the last 30 years. It's kind of messy. But the other thing too, though, Rob, is that there are areas that need significant improvement in the industry, right? And the industry has not done a great job as an industry to deal with those areas that need significant improvement. Now, there are companies who've done a tremendous job in those areas that need significant improvement individually as a company. The problem is that you have a fairly unregulated industry. And I know that a lot of people don't like the word regulation, right? But you should think about regulations as protections for things. And that is, if there are rules that you have to have a certain quality of, say, if you're going to be an importer of these fish, you actually have to be able to maintain those fish alive and do things. You can set things up in ways that protect the businesses who have invested in that type of stuff to keep things alive. I think one of the starkest examples of that situation is the time I have spent in Sri Lanka or the Philippines or Indonesia, and I have walked into export facilities that are run the way you would want them to be run. And then I have watched people go to the ocean with 5-gallon buckets and fill up plastic buckets and plastic tanks, bring fish in and export fish right beside that facility. Those two market systems don't compete together because one is a lot cheaper to run and the other is more expensive. And so until the industry really, I think, can get itself around regulating itself in a way that is, as a good fishery should be, well regulated, difficult to get into, expensive to get into, so that professionals are engaged, you're always going to have these problems, right? And then you've got this issue of, people, really loud voices do not like keeping animals as pets, right? That they don't consider to be domesticated animals. And so, that is always going to be background. That's somebody's moral framework that they've developed for themselves. And it's not my job to pick their moral framework but it is my job to say that this is not an unsustainable industry, right? Or this particular fishery is not unsustainable, or and so I think that's the challenge there, is that there's a lot of work to be done. And if people want a hobby that has species that they're growing in their house that are going to be endangered in the future, which is corals, they really need to tighten this up so that they can say to regulators, even though this is an endangered species now because we have mucked it all up out in the ocean, we can keep these and grow these ourselves and have these and work with these countries that are producing these, and there's some benefit to the ecosystem of our trade. We need to get on top of that, because I don't think the hobbyists understand that when a species is listed as endangered, there is no more commercial activity of it. Zero. So if your corals are listed as endangered, you cannot move those outside of your state without going to federal prison. And so, that is the law. And so that is the world that we are headed into. And the only way you could justify a change in policy or things would be to have really great evidence that the industry is providing a benefit to those ecosystems where these things are from. And that should be a continuous conversation that people have.
Yeah, agreed. And having a framework and policy surrounding that shows that we're following best practice, right? And enforcing that. And those are really difficult to do right now in the aquarium trade.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. So I know we've been having fun chatting. I want to go back to Sean and Evie. Sean, I know you wanted to ask a little bit about the new program running second year this year at Roger Williams, which is Reef Retreat, and kind of where that came from and what it involves.
Yeah, I did. I want to kind of finish up with a thought there, just to kind of because I know a lot of people that aren't as deep into it as you, Andy, and they don't know some of this information for them might be like drinking through a fire hose, right? And it's just coming at them so fast. And so essentially, what happened here is you did mention Biota's name, and so we will go ahead and speak on that. And that you were upset about the statement that was made, and Biota did make a statement that wanted to encourage the further and continued restriction and banning of yellow tang collection, which they have successfully bred within their facilities, and they have a large investment into breeding yellow tangs. And so the statement we felt was to kind of give them further protection to continue to force people to buy yellow tangs from them because they have the investment in it, even though that there is no evidence, as you spoke of, with the research project done to show the impact of sustainability of collecting of yellow tangs in Hawaii. And so you spoke in protection of the facility that wanted to that showed that research and said, hey, there isn't a significant impact on the sustainability of yellow tangs. Why are we trying to shut this down? It shouldn't be for business interests. It should be whether if it would affect sustainability of yellow tangs or not. And so they didn't like, you didn't like the statement that Biota made, and many people didn't as well. And so you spoke up against that just to try to keep people from villainizing the collection facility there in Hawaii and villainizing altogether wild-caught practices, so we don't go down that road. One thing that I found interesting that was, there was the statement that was made, then there was the clearing up of the statement that was made that kind of clarified why the statement was made, which didn't really make it seemingly better, just more obvious. And then there was your statement, which really kind of called that out first time really publicly, with an article. And then there was a statement that one of the employees there at Biota made, writing it back to you, which was, made it seem very sad, like as if you were turning your back on the education and the importance of aquaculture.
Well, I don't know if that's what Jake. I don't know if that's what Jake did in his response. I think they're in a difficult position, right? Jake was a former student of mine. I really like Jake a lot. I like a lot of people who work at Biota a lot, but they're in an indefensible position, right? And I haven't spoken to them about it, but they have no ability to defend their position. Right. There is no defense to their position. And so I can tell you that just my awareness of the corporate environment and how this sort of stuff works, they needed to respond some way. And I think Jake did that, and he's free to respond to that. And I love to talk about this stuff, and I can talk about this stuff for hours, and I'm happy to have conversations with him about this stuff, right? About this. To me, this is not a tit for tat type of thing, right? This is what is the correct ethical framework to be operating in the same environment to make sure you support sustainable industries that do not harm the environment, right? But also help fishing communities who have a legitimate right to use a resource as a dive community uses a resource or someone else uses a resource, right? And so it's really a question of how do you look at the data and make a decision around what we should be doing, and then how do you not villainize or basically cast aside a fishery that has been so well managed, and also all of the other aquarium fisheries that are well managed as well. Fiji's really well managed. Australia, really well managed, right? There are lots of well managed aquarium fisheries that people should support by buying fish from, and that to me is the question we should be talking about, is how do we do that? Not who said what when. And my point is that I'm on top of this type of work, and I will almost always comment when I have the ability to comment, either at scientific meetings or in forums like this. If I had seen their letter before the public comment period was over in Hawaii, I would have definitely written a letter directly to the into that public comment period. But I just think it's important that hobbyists not get confused about what the actual reality here is, right? You have you have a company involved that's got a business to run. They're making business decisions that has nothing to do with the sustainability of that fishery, right? And they should not think that because they're buying aquacultured animals from a company, they're somehow protecting that environment. That's just not true.
And absolutely, and I agree with you. And I think the reason why I wanted to sum it up is because so many of the hobbyists are really only getting that surface information.
Yeah.
They see the headlines come out, they see the fire back, and they say, okay, this person's, and really just to try to say, hey, that did happen. We're going to acknowledge all those details.
Right.
But I wanted to talk deeper about it, like you have.
Sure.
And really kind of educate people on a further level so that they kind of get away from the hype of the headlines, understand what happened, and understand it wasn't really personal there. It's just like we're trying to, basically get away from the drama of it. Let's not jump into the narrative. It's not like you were going after Jake or turning back against what you had previously taught him. I think that he would have been the only person that could have spoke from that kind of passion, because I really see that he has a large passion in this. But it's not particularly him that you were speaking against. It's the,
No, it's like, again, this is I am highly troubled when companies throw their weight around in ways they should not, because they have unduly influence on these, right? I mean, for example, we do not know, for example, if any companies in the aquarium industry have spent any money lobbying to close that fishery, right? We do know companies have spent a lot of money on the environmental impact assessment and trying to get that fishery open back up, right? We do know that because that's public, but we don't know the other side of it. And we do know that there's a lot of activism out there for the fishes and some of the other groups out in Hawaii that are receiving a lot of money, right, from dive industries and some other industries to try to close that fishery down, right? And so from the public side, if you're not paying attention to it, you might open a blog article and be like, oh, that's a really great thing that they're going to close that fishery and I can get these fish from there. But that's my concern, is that people, the hobbyists do not have time to get into the weeds in this stuff. And so I just felt like this is something I've worked on for a very long time. People need to be able to open their phone and read about this much on there and understand what's happening.
You did an excellent job of that. And that's why I wanted to bring you on again.
Sure.
And just to sum it up, I mean, we believe here at Reef Builders, we believe that aquaculture is a great solution to many types of fish collecting that it can contribute and being able to enjoy our hobby. We also believe that, wild caught fish contributes to us being able to have fish in the hobby, and that we have found that a lot of these facilities to be sustainable. And so we're not speaking for against one side or the other. We really see that both in tandem can help us, sustainably keep fish in this hobby. And so moving on now, finally, I do want to talk, as Rob said, about Reef Retreat, because that is an awesome thing that you've done. I know that with MACNA not being a show that's currently being run, I don't know if they'll be coming back or not. Hopefully they do. Had a great educational program with lots of speakers. I mean, I went to the one out in Vegas that Rob helped put on, which is why I love him being a managing partner here at Reef Builders, because he brings that. There was like 30 speakers speaking at this show. I couldn't decide which one to go to, right? Which topic to go to at that show. And so it's great to see that, because there's a void there now of getting those professional speakers, that professional education. And you have been working to create a solution and at least try to impact it going back in the other direction, right?
So, I mean, and that's how this little thing came up, was that I look forward to MACNA, because of the educational aspect of it. I felt like there was a lot of knowledge in that transfer that's happening at that meeting that you didn't get in other places. I go to a lot of aquaculture conferences, right? And I love a good trade show because I see a lot of good new products and you can see new things. There's a seafood show here in Boston that I love, that trade show. But what to me was missing, because I can go to lots of different trade shows and things, what missing was the educational side of it. And I think that's because there's a mismatch of what you need to do to put on a fairly expensive conference versus the educational side. It's one of these things where it's hard to have a really strong educational conference and have a trade show, because they're directly opposing each other with the people who are there, and you're trying to have, right? It's hard to do. And so I think that's watching Magna fall apart, and when it was obvious that they were going to have to go bankrupt, then I emailed Rob and Rich Ross and a few other people, and I said we have to do something, and I said, here's what I think we could do. We could run something here at the university. We can pick a weekend in the summer when there's nobody here, but and we've got great facilities. We have amazing food. It's pretty easy to do, and we can keep the cost down.
Mhm.
And so that's what we did. And so we got it spooled up last year in the December range, I think, and we were able to get enough sponsors to make it work, because to be able to offer a kind of immersive experience that's really 2.5 days or so, that's just really immersive, right, and small. It's not hugely expensive, but it's also not cheap to do. But we wanted to try to keep the cost so somebody could come, all their food and everything's included, and keep it down at a reasonable level. And so we were able to get enough people that were really interested in the educational side and support that. And so we have about 200 people coming this year, and we have enough room. And Lena, my lab manager, is the one who really kind of keeps things moving. And we really don't have the space to make it much bigger, like any bigger than we're a small university. So we don't it's in our law school, which I love the reaction that people had to the fact that we're in a appellate court, which has great acoustics and things, but it's a courtroom, and that's where our conference is. But it really is for educational purpose and for people to mingle and get to hang out for 2 days and not do anything else, right? And the sponsors actually get to sit in on all the talks, which they don't normally do because they're usually in the trade show booth. So, but really great speakers that we had last year. Was what I tried to do with it is I tried to look at it from what I loved about conferences, which is topics that build on themselves and that you don't have to get up and run between talks. And then having somebody set the scene on a topic and get really deep into it, and then have a hobbyist perspective come about, say, whether it was raising corals. We had this great 3-part talk on raising corals where Rich gave a talk on doing it out of his house, right? Mind blowing that you can just do this out of your house now, right? Then we had Nicole Fogarty come from UNC Wilmington, who's been doing it in a lab environment, really, really phenomenal research and work. Talk about what does it take to do research on this, and how do you do it as research, and what are they interested in. And then Kevin Erickson came and gave it from a government at Ames, which is like a 400-person team going to try to do 100 million corals for restoration, right? And so the scale of this in your house, in your lab, and then as a government it built on it, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. And so this year, I think we've got some good topics, and we'll hopefully have some good conversations. And it really is it's an educational conference. That's what it's for, right? That's why we have it.
Well, I think it's a great show. I didn't get the pleasure of going to it last year. It reminds me of the regional aquatics workshop that from a professional side, I attend that very often. I actually went to the New England Aquarium as my very first draw there in Boston. So I did see the facility. It is a spectacular facility, as you said, where it just turns and turns and goes up and up and up. And you can see the aquarium all the way around. And so very beautiful facility. And I like how in the professional side, I mean, everybody, it's just such a fun experience. The entire professional community gets together and they share ideas, and they have case studies that they've been doing individually within their facilities that they just take turns kind of sharing, and people come in just to learn for days and do nothing but. And so this seems to be one for the hobby to kind of get together and do the same. Not so much a place to buy fish and coral, or to learn about manufacturers' products, but to just learn and educate. And I thought you accomplished that nicely.
We made the conscious decision that if you want to go to a trade show and buy a frag swap or something, you can go to the Frag Farmers thing that Connecticut puts on, which is phenomenal. Or you can go to all of these other events to do that, right? And so you can go someplace and do that. There's plenty of those. This is my way of saying, I know scientists that work in these areas. Let me ask them to come. We'll take care of them when they come here, and let me get them to give a talk that is at the right level for hobbyists to get really great information of, and then people can hang out with them for a couple of days and talk to them about this, right? And not always easy to get scientists to want to have to intermingle with industry always, right? Because there's sometimes some conflicts there and everything, but uh, but we try to, we try to bring science back into this, because I think to me, what I love watching is the fact that, like, when Jamie Craggs was working on breeding corals for the first time, right, and the explosion of that technology in science all over the world, that is 100% aquarium technology that was used for that, and husbandry that did that, right? And Jamie made that his dissertation, has done some phenomenal research around that. That all is possible because of the aquarium hobby. Not possible without that. The way people are doing that, right?
Right.
There's labs that can breed corals in a natural environment and things, but not the way that this is done, where you can do it at your house or in your lab anywhere you are in the country or world. That came from the aquarium hobby, right? That technology, the lighting, all of that is hobby driven. Basically, the controllers, the whole thing comes from the aquarium hobby, because hobbyists have really kind of innovated ways to be able to maintain corals in their tanks, and to the success they've had. Because, when I got into growing corals, it was in the 90s, and we thought we were really spectacular when we got a little bit of acropora growth or something, and I remember importing the first corals from the Solomon Islands that were tied to those little cement plugs from those women in the Guadalcanal area that were fishing line, and watching those grow, right? I remember getting those for the first time. But this is what's happened now with corals is such a different level that people are growing them. They are growing so many corals that, if you talk to a successful reef aquarium hobbyist, they have so many corals growing in their tank, they don't know what to do with them. They have to prune their tank, basically. And so that transition I've got to see, because of just how old I am and where I grew up, and so I've watched that transition happen. And so I love the fact that the hobby can give back to scientists too. And so you try to bring some scientists in who may actually get some benefit from meeting people like Julian Sprung, or seeing presentations by hobbyists on growing corals, and then they can give a great presentation on something. Or you might, and so that's kind of the idea of the show, is to intermingle those two populations of people, and then thoughtfully put a program together where people can walk out and go, wow, that was really amazing. And it's not recorded, so you have to come to enjoy it.
Well, you had said earlier, what is Reef Builders? We just want to help educate people. We look at opportunities like this, to kind of further the understanding and of what's going on the professional side of the hobby to the hobbyists themselves, and we're looking kind of at the way at which they do it. And so we might not have as many blog articles as we had before, because we see that people learn. Some of the youngest hobbyists, even people in their 30s, are starting to change the way they learn. And so particularly why I wanted you to come on the live stream, because some people just want to watch it. They want to take it in their eyes and their ears. They don't want to read the article, or they want it in a short reel. They want it in a minute time, or they want it in a 2-minute time. And so really looking at that, I know that over the last few years, I even helped with the Florida Reef Track Restoration Project, where I took an influencer around 6 different locations around the country to really talk about what was going on with this Florida Reef Track Restoration Project, and and the way to do it was to make more entertaining YouTube videos, right?
Yeah,
right. Entertainment, but also tell them the real seriousness about what's going on with this. And it's a highly successful way of doing it. So just tried to think outside the box, to force people to learn. And so that's who we are today. And Rob's helping me, and Evie and Raj, do that in the best way possible with the wisdom that he brings, and kind of keep us grounded instead of getting too hilarious, too funny. Rob will keep us grounded, and we'll keep to a nice, stable, wisdomatic way of educating with a little bit of a range. So that's what we are. So Evie, you didn't get a chance to say anything, and I feel so bad. Us 3 men just kind of talking around, and so Evie, I know that you've been watching the comments and that you had some things and thoughts for yourself. So I do want to turn it to Evie just for a minute, so that we can skip you. So.
Well, I don't know. You've done so many different projects when it does come to breeding and everything. Do you have one that you feel like was your most challenging and your most rewarding? And are they 2 different species?
Oh, my true love is always going to be around Lysmata, right? And so that's where my real, like, if you said, Andy, you have to get rid of everything in the lab and you can only keep one species or two or a handful, it would be my peppermint shrimp, and the cleaner shrimp. So the cleaner shrimp to me were always this really kind of great species to work on, and I worked on them a long time, but they are kind of a commitment too, because you could be going, raising cleaner shrimp for, if you're good at it, in the 70-day range or 60-day range. If you make a mistake, you might be doing it for 6 months. So yeah, I've had some alive for 6 months. And then at any moment, something could happen with the power or your pump or anything like that. And then everything dies, right? And you've spent 90 days working on something. You come in the morning and everything's gone. And so those are, to be honest with you, I mean, I love working with fish. I mean, our primary output is fish for public, or techniques for public aquariums and things. But my true love is the shrimp that I spent 7 years just kind of buried in working on my dissertation. And there were my advisor's shrimp who passed away about 10 years ago now. They were what he is, large part of his career. And so to me, those peppermint shrimp are the thing that and cleaner shrimp and fire shrimp are things that I love the most, and would always fall back to if I had to only have one thing. But I have the benefit of having a lab with staff and students and stuff. So I have lots of things down there. So sometimes too many. And then, the fish wise, we move around a lot with those fish, right? The triggerfish are really special because it was something that I had always wanted to work on, and we just kind of checked that off. But we haven't come back to them because there's really not a lot of demand in public aquariums for fish like the queen, right? That's really aggressive like that. So we haven't come back to it. So, but yeah, so I think that's the best answer I could give you on that.
Well, Evie, do you want to? We had a number of people comment here just quickly before. We've had Andrew for a while, so we'll try to be cognizant of time. Just highlight any of the questions that you feel like you would want to make sure we get to them.
People looking forward to Reef Retreat, saying that it was an awesome event last year. Kumar has asked, can we get a detailed video from the lab breeding process?
I've thought about that. I've held some of that really close to myself, and students. So and I think part of it is that there's some areas that we haven't figured out yet that I wanted to figure out before we kind of said this is how you go about it. But there's a lot of stuff published on Lysmata, tons of stuff, right? And I know that I've had enough professional aquarists in my lab now where people are starting to replicate some of the things that we've done. And I have students graduated that are companies now that are working on this stuff too. But yeah, I think that's something in the future we need to do. I'm getting old enough, I think, to let go of some of this stuff I've held on to for the last 30 years that I didn't, right? But yeah, I think that's definitely, and maybe what we'll do is, probably can't do it this year, but maybe next year we'll have like a little workshop or something like that on maybe just those shrimp or something. But such an interesting larvae, right? And such a good process for rearing an animal. Such a really neat morphology and just life history those shrimp have. And but yeah.
So then this one would probably start leading.
How did you get? That's a good one though, because a lot of people are like, "Wow, how did they settle?" Well, they just settle. They don't need anything. They have to be competent. And up to the right size and developmental stage to settle, but there's nothing holding them back to settle. I have worked with there's one species of shrimp that I described that lives in a tube sponge in the Caribbean. So it's an obligate symbiont of that sponge. You don't find it anywhere else. It needs that sponge to settle. And the way I know this is because when I was in grad school and I had my lab really rolling, I could raise any of them always. And I've spent, I had that one competent to settle for about 5 months and it just didn't settle. Right. And so they were ready to go. They were just waiting to find a sponge. And so that was one of the species that if you said, Andy, we're going to send you someplace for a year to work and you can do anything you wanted to do, and it doesn't matter where you go or do what you do because everything that you're working on now will continue and you'll come back. that's the project that I wanted to finish, that a hurricane basically destroyed for me, was demonstrating that this peppermint shrimp actually needs a sponge to settle. But the cleaner shrimp, the challenge behind the cleaner shrimp is they're enormous when they settle. So they're much bigger. So the fire shrimp are around a centimeter, a little less than a centimeter when they settle, I think. The cleaner shrimp are almost 2.5 when they settle. And they're really big when they settle. And so you have this really large larval stage that you're dealing with, right, in a tank. And so it can just take forever for them to kind of grow to that size and get to the stage of competency. And so if you aren't hitting your mark on every part of their nutrition and everything with water quality, Lysmata have this way of developing but not developing. So they can just park in one developmental stage. And so crustaceans are like insects. They have to molt to get to the next stage, right? So they're not like a fish that continues to grow linearly, right? They have certain developmental stages, and what they can do is delay their development and not develop. So they just can park. And I had a species, I think it's Lymata galapagos, maybe we were raising one time, that parked for 70 days in Zoea 4 or something, right? And so, yeah, you question why you're continuing to do this when it sits there for so long. But you question a lot of things when you have these animals like that are going this far and you don't think you're going anywhere. So what you have to do is you have to learn how to know when they're competent, right? And there's really great literature out there on like looking at the SETI and stuff on their pleopods to know when they're competent, because if they're not competent, they can't settle. And it turns out that once they get to competency, as long as you provide them enough food and stuff, they'll metamorphose and settle out without a problem. And we've settled, hundreds of them. And then with fire shrimp, we've legitimately raised thousands of them at a given time. We had about 1,000 or so settle out, and there's not any mechanism preventing that. It's just a husbandry issue or a larval rearing issue that is quite challenging. And so I think what happens to people is they tend to look at the number of days they've been doing something, and the shrimp don't care how many days you've been doing something. They care about what developmental stage they're in. So I might have shrimp that are competent to settle, and you might have shrimp, Rob might have shrimp that are 6 months behind me. They're the same age, right? And so that's the challenge with that.
Well, let me say this. I have two things that I want to be able to do with you. One, I want you to come and speak at a Reef Stock, and so let's go ahead and get that one out of the way.
Is that in Denver?
Yes.
And is there snow in the mountains?
Yes.
All right. We can talk about that then.
It'll be perfect for you. And so we'll fly you in. We'll take care of you. We do the honorariums. We really respect your time and would appreciate that, so we can bring what you're talking about now to a place where people can come hear it. And then also, I used to, in my prior organization, I did a clownfish breeding video where I got to go through a facility and do the step-by-steps, look at things under the microscope, look at the different size feeds, and really kind of walk people through this process. It's a really good video on a small channel that got a couple 100,000 views and just keeps growing. And so when you are ready to open up that facility a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, give us a shot to come out, and I do a kind of a day in the life type of view of it, where I come and I
can tell you this, that my ability to make these videos is zero, basically, because I'm too old to really be good at this stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, I think, look, I've been so enamored by how well hobbyists share information with each other, right? And so I think we've always been pretty good about sharing our methods and techniques and stuff. And so yeah, I think it's just something I just haven't done because I haven't had the time to do it in a way that I felt did it justice. And there's so much written out there on this, but it definitely, I think there's a lot of people who really are interested and would like the ability to work on these things that don't have the parts and pieces to start with that we could probably help them out with.
That'd be awesome. So just keep us in mind. I'll send you the clownfish video I did on it, so that might give you kind of a structure of how to present it. But it was really fun, and I just love doing it. And when we do it, which is my final thing, is how do we support what you're doing at the Roger Williams University Wet Lab? Is there a way that, as we found out and want to support some of the educational topics Reef Retreat is one, right? If everyone comes to retreat, that's going to those proceeds are there used?
Well, we have not actually. We've held every penny of Reef Retreat money aside for Reef Retreat because we were concerned about getting Reef Retreat going and stabilized to make sure it could be something if it needed to be there for a very long period of time. So we've literally like partitioned that. And so my lab is very asymmetrically funded. I have contracts that we do with aquariums that we help maintain. We do some public aquarium work that, with the New England Aquarium. We raise animals in our facility, and those go out into the hobby. And then we're a nonprofit organization that we have private donors and things like that. So, but I would tell people this, that if they really want to support the industry, what they need to support is they need to think about where they're buying their animals from, ask questions about that, and then buy animals that are from a company or from a place that has the ethos they want it to represent. So just ask questions, right? And understand and watch out for the marketing of it, and understand where your animals are coming from, and take your time, and get to know those areas a little bit and know a little bit more about it, and make good decisions about that. And if people want to support the facility or something, I'm more than happy to talk to people about that. But I've also never been good at figuring out how to take people up on those offers. So
Well, it sounds like they can figure out where you're sending your fish that you grew there, and maybe know that would be supporting kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, sure. But I would encourage people to, when they're buying animals, to think about where those animals are coming from, and just make sure that they do a little background research. They don't jump into buying the wrong animals for their tank, and that they support wild fisheries or aquaculture that supports the continued growth of a educational hobby that is really beneficial for people to engage in. I mean, it has enormous value for children, right? So they're not stuck on their phones or computer, right? And so if people take care of the hobby and think about it a little bit more critically, and make sure that they're putting their money to support products and animals that support the growth of the hobby in a ethical framework, then I think that benefits the greater good. And I think it's really important that people continue to come back to that, because there's so much marketing out there of things, and there's so much fraught with either buying products or that don't support that part of the industry. I think it's easy to kind of fall down to that trap.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said. Well said.
Rob, anything else? We took him for 20 minutes longer than I expected.
I'm sorry about that.
I want to let him go. And yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this with us, and put the information in another form for people to learn.
Absolutely. No, thanks a lot. And yeah, good to see Rob at Reef Retreat, and I enjoyed it.
Yep. Excellent. Thanks, Andy.
Of course.
All right. Thank you again, Andrew. And for all of the hobbyists that are watching, thanks for tuning in. And we'll leave this up for people to go and check out. If we can get that video of your diver going down into the aquarium to try to get the eggs.
It's not my video. That's New England's video. And I'm not sure if they have, but they may have it on their blog. I don't know. Right. And so you'll have to, if you look at the New England Aquarium, does a really good job talking about the aquaculture work they've done, and Monica and Barb and the group up there have done phenomenal work. Their website has some pretty good videos and information on it. They may have that video on there that you can link to or something.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll check out for that and see if we can add this to the link for you guys, so that if you're watching, we can kind of have people visualize and follow along.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure. And we will see you all soon, either on the next live reef therapy or in the next Reef Builders video.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.